welcome to you still in your red and green holiday PJs. Welcome to all of you swimming in empty boxes and piles of wrapping paper scraps yet to be taken out to the recycling bin. Welcome to you who just noticed the elbow propping up your coffee is gritty from crumbs left behind from a holiday feast. And welcome to you surrounded by none of the merry detritus of gatherings of family and friends, but instead perhaps by memories of gatherings past and hopes for gatherings future. I'm Vanessa Cowie, today's worship associate, coming to you from the Unitarian Universalists of Transylvania County, where our mission is to support individual spiritual journeys and to promote social, economic, and environmental justice. Today, winding up a holiday season that was perhaps more hectic than planned and facing the specter of another surge of COVID, we accept gifts with grace. The gift of rest from our weekly get up, get dressed, and go to church routine. Not because going to church is a burden, but because everything has its season, and after great activity, rest is a gift. And the gift of a Sunday message from our Unitarian Universalist siblings. Here's the story. Last summer, when lockdowns were trying our patience and UU congregations everywhere were experimenting with online services, streaming services, drive-through services, outdoor services, and you name it services, a group of UU ministers and musicians in North Carolina put together several sermons, readings, and music and gave them to their UU family, no strings attached. Unless you want to imagine them in bright, crisp paper wound with a colorful ribbon and bow, as I did. It was called the Summer 2021 Tar Heel UU Worship Project. Today's gift is from the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Raleigh. This past summer, with UUTC's new minister, Reverend Bob, and as we began to tentatively open our doors to in-person worship for the first time since lockdown, we didn't feel the need to accept this Tar Heel gift. But this fall, I emailed the Reverend James Kubal-Kumoto, lead minister at the UU Fellowship of Raleigh, and asked if his portion of this present was still available to us in the winter. Within a few minutes, he'd emailed back, yes, of course. Now, in this season of giving and generosity and receiving with gratitude, we will open the wrapping, a fable about dancing circus bears, and accept the treasure inside the box. One minister's answer to the questions, what is Unitarian Universalism, and why do we even bother to come to church? We move more deeply now into our worship service with the lighting of our chalice. Our words for the chalice lighting are Open to Unexpected Answers by Julianne Lepp. We seek our place in the world and the answers to our heart's deep questions. As we seek, may our hearts be open to unexpected answers. May the light of our chalice remind us that this is a community of warmth, of wisdom, and of welcoming of multiple truths. Our first hymn today is one of those gifts from the Raleigh UU Fellowship. It's hymn number 15, The Lone Wild Bird. In today's sermon, you'll hear the Reverend Kubal-Kumoto quote the Reverend A. Powell Davies, former minister of All Souls, Unitarian, in Washington, D.C., saying that Davies went to church in part to feel again the love I owe to others. Kubal-Kumoto cites his UU fellowship's caring for one another from birth till death and beyond. We share the joys and sorrows of our lives together, and this is so important. Such care for one another through all the joys and sorrows of our lives can stand as a rationale for our ritual of cycle of life. As we do each week, we now pause to honor these milestones and to lift up those who need our healing thoughts. If you are listening in real time, please share your joys and concerns in the chat. We will light a candle for them. This first candle is for the gift of winter, for this dark season of rest, restoration, and renewal. This candle is for the frontline workers putting themselves in harm's way for our community in this fresh tide of COVID uncertainty and anxiety. We honor them. We light a candle for the gift of this UUTC community and for the gift of the larger UU community, and especially for our fellow UUs whose gifts we enjoy today. We light a candle for those milestones shared in the online chat. And we light a final candle for all those joys and concerns that remain unvoiced at this time. Let us pause for a moment of musical beauty to reflect on all the joys and sorrows we carry in our hearts.
A gentle breeze from Hushabye Mountain softly blows o'er Lullaby Bay. It fills the sails of boats that are waiting to sail your worries away. It isn't far from Hushabye Mountain, and your boat will waits down by the quay. The winds of night so softly are sighing. Soon they will fly, your troubles to see. So close your eyes on Hushabye Mountain, wave goodbye to cares of the day, and watch your boat from Hushabye Mountain sail far away from Lullaby Bay. So close your eyes from Hushabye Mountain, wave goodbye to cares of the day, and watch your boat from Hushabye Mountain sail far away from Lullaby Bay.
Our reading this morning is the short story Brilliant Silence by Spencer Holst. Two Alaskan Kodiak bears joined a small circus where the pair appeared in a nightly parade pulling a covered wagon. The two were taught to somersault, to spin, to stand on their heads, and to dance on their hind paws, paw in paw, stepping in unison. Under the spotlight, the dancing bears, a male and a female, soon became favorites of the crowd. The circus went south on a West Coast tour through Canada to California and down on into Mexico, through Panama into South America, down the Andes, the length of Chile, to the southernmost isles of Tierra del Fuego. There, a jaguar jumped the juggler and afterwards mortally mauled the animal trainer. And the shocked show people disbanded in dismay and horror. In the confusion, the bears went on their own way. Without a master, they wandered off by themselves into the wilderness of those densely wooded, wildly windy sub-Antarctic islands. Utterly away from people, on an out-of-the-way, uninhabited island, and in a climate they found ideal, the bears mated, thrived, multiplied, and after a number of generations populated the entire island. Indeed, after some years, the descendants of those two original circus bears moved out onto half a dozen adjacent islands. And 70 years later, when scientists finally found and enthusiastically studied the bears, it was discovered all of them, to a bear, were performing splendid circus tricks. On nights when the sky is bright and the moon is full, they gather to dance. They gather their cubs and the juveniles in a circle around them. They gather together out of the wind at the center of a sparkling circular crater left by a meteorite, which had fallen in a bed of chalk. Its glassy walls are chalk white, its flat floor is covered with white gravel, and it is well drained and dry. No vegetation grows within. When the moon rises above it, the light reflecting off the walls fills the crater with a pool of moonlight, so that it is twice as bright on the crater floor as anywhere else in the vicinity. Scientists speculate. Originally, the full moon had reminded the two bears of the circus spotlight, and for that reason, they danced. Yet it might be asked, what music do the descendants dance to? Perhaps only a Unitarian Universalist minister would read Spencer Holt's short story, Brilliant Silence, and think it an apt parable for liberal religion in general and Unitarian Universalism more specifically. But when I first read Holt's story, that is indeed what I thought. What could I possibly mean? When I imagine the scientist in Holt's story first seeing the dancing bears, I can imagine them asking, what's this all about? What's going on? How can those bears be dancing without any music? Why are they dancing at all? I know that some folks ask similar questions about Unitarian Universalism. For many people outside of Unitarian Universalism, we are a bit of a mystery. Something seems to be missing here. The signs in front of most Unitarian Universalist congregations have the word church on it. Ours doesn't. I recently had a conversation with one of you about whether this attracted people to our congregation or kept them away. Whatever the case, we do most of the things that most churches do. On the other hand, some of the symbols, beliefs, and rituals of more traditional religion seem to be missing. We don't have a cross on our roof. We don't talk about the Bible as much as other churches. We don't talk about God as much. We don't talk about Jesus as much. We don't talk about the afterlife as much. We don't recite a creed about any of those things either. Just as I imagine those scientists asking, how can those bears be dancing without any music? I know that some people ask, how can Unitarian Universalism be a religion at all? For some people, I know that Unitarian Universalism seems like an Oreo cookie with the cream licked out. Something essential seems to be missing. Back to the bears. Perhaps the bears, the descendants of the original circus bears, are dancing because they are mindlessly carrying on the behavior they learned from their parents and grandparents. Perhaps they are just going through the motions without giving those motions much thought. Back to us. Perhaps we're similar. Most Unitarian Universalists grew up going to more traditional churches, and perhaps even though we have rejected the teachings of more traditional churches, or those churches have rejected us, we just can't get out of the habit of getting up and going to church on Sunday mornings, or at least watching and listening to services from our home. Erasmus Darwin, Charles Darwin's grandfather, was a Unitarian, and he called Unitarianism a featherbed for fallen Christians, meaning, I suspect, a soft place to land after having let go of traditional beliefs, a kind of halfway house to secularity. Perhaps religion for us is like our appendix, something we have inherited from our ancestors, but in truth is a vestigial artifact of a bygone era. Back to the bears. Perhaps, though, the bears aren't just going through the motions, or to be more exact, they found some value in going through the motions, in dancing together without any music. I can imagine they rather enjoy it. When Hiromi and I once took dancing lessons, we often danced together without music, mostly because I had too much trouble dancing to the music without stepping on Hiromi's feet. Even without the music, dancing was enjoyable and easier on my wife's feet. Perhaps in some way, their silent dancing helps the bears lead fuller, deeper, richer, more abundant bear lives. Perhaps there is even some evolutionary adaptive value to their silent dancing. Back to us. Perhaps like the bears, even though we're missing some of the things you find in more traditional religious communities, we have found some value in going through the motions of religious community. In this congregation, we welcome newcomers among us, offering them hospitality and telling them that we believe they are worthy of love just as they are. We worship together. A member of my former congregation once asked me, "How can we worship together if some of us don't believe in a supreme being?" My answer then, which I'll repeat now, is that the word worship comes from the Old English word meaning to shape what is of worth. Worship isn't necessary to glorify God. It's not necessary because we're sinful, though we certainly sometimes are. It's necessary because we become forgetful. We become forgetful of those ideals we hold highest for our lives, get distracted by competing cultural narratives, and get disconnected from that which inspires us. A. Powell Davies, a Unitarian minister, once wrote, "Let me tell you why I come to church. I come to church, and whether I was a preacher or not, because I fall below my own standards and need to be constantly brought back to them. I am afraid of becoming selfish and indulgent, and my church of the Free Spirit, brings me back to what I want to be. I could easily despair. Doubt and dismay could overwhelm me. My church renews my courage and my hope." It is not enough, Davy writes, that I should think about the world and its problems at the level of a newspaper report or a magazine discussion. It could too soon become too low a level. I must have my conscience sharpened until it goads me to the most thorough and responsible thinking to which I am capable. I must feel again the love I owe to others. I must not only hear about it, but feel it. In church I do. I am brought toward my best, in every way toward my best. Here at UUFR, we also learn and grow together, often in small groups such as Chala circles, where we can reflect on that question of questions, the most important of all questions: how shall we live our lives? We also care for one another, from birth until death and beyond. We share the joys and sorrows of our lives together. And this is so important. Even before the pandemic, we lived in a nation that was more socially isolated than ever before. According to an American Sociological Review study, the number of people with whom we can talk to about a personal problem is declining. On average, and this was before the pandemic, most Americans said there are only 2 people in their lives with whom they can talk about something personal. For about 50% of Americans, that one person was their spouse. For 25% of Americans, there was nobody at all. Just imagine that. Even before this pandemic, 1 out of every 4 people in this country had nobody to talk to about their joys, their sorrows, their hopes, their worries. Is it any wonder that the number one reason that people say they come to this church or any other church is to find community? We also work together to make our world more compassionate and just, and find a meaning for our own lives in doing so. For folks who think that religion is all about believing the right things and saying the right prayers in the right order, this probably all still sounds like something is missing, like we're just going through the motions. But for those of us who believe, that religion is not about getting us into heaven, but getting heaven into us. For those of us who believe that religion is about living in a way that is satisfying to our own souls. For those of us who believe that religion is about living with more connection and compassion, with more awe and gratitude, with more forgiveness and acceptance, with more trust and hope, it is more than enough. Back to the bears. Perhaps something more is going on with those bears, something that's not immediately obvious to the eye. Perhaps there is some other way of understanding what's going on. What do I mean? One summer, several years ago, my family and I drove across the northern part of Washington State through the Cascade Mountains. On the way, we visited North Cascade National Park. Before taking a hike up Thunder Knob Trail, we stopped at the visitor center and watched the short film that featured the park's spectacular scenery. Like most films of this kind, there was a lot of soaring music and pithy quotations by John Muir, as required by federal law. This film also used a quotation attributed to Shakespeare. "The earth has music for those who listen." The earth has music for those who listen. As soon as I got home, I Googled this quotation to see which play or sonnet it was from. The quotation shows up all over the internet, always attributed to Shakespeare, but it turns out it's a misattribution. An internet search of Shakespeare's complete works turns up no such quotation. I'm not quite sure who first said it. Maybe somebody made it up and decided to attribute it to Shakespeare, thinking to himself or herself that if Shakespeare had been given the opportunity to write such words, he would have. I understand this kind of thing happened to Jesus a lot too. Despite its lack of historical authenticity, I like the quotation's sentiment. The earth has music for those who listen. And perhaps not only the earth, but the universe too. Perhaps all of creation has music for those who listen. Perhaps those bears are listening and dancing to the sounds of the natural world around them, the sounds of wind in the trees, the sounds of insects chirping and humming, the sound of waves on a nearby beach. But perhaps they are also in step with something larger, some deeper unnamed rhythm and hidden harmony that is part of the cosmic symphony of creation itself, pulsating through and pervading every bit of being. Back to us. I wonder if we, as Unitarian Universalists, are so different. As Unitarian Universalists, we often look to the natural world for inspiration. William Ellery Channing, one of the founders of Unitarianism in this country, once said, "He who studies nothing but the Bible does not study that book aright. For if it were rightly read, it would send him for instruction to every creature that God hath made, to every event wherein God is acting. That reader has not read aright the Sermon on the Mount, who has not learned to read sermons in the changes of the seasons and in the changes of human history." I mean something even more than this, though. Within Unitarian Universalism, there has always been a critical, rational, skeptical strand. This is part of our tradition. Yet there has also always been the mystical strand as well, a strand which affirms the possibility of connection between the individual soul and ultimate reality, a strand which says it's possible to hear and dance to the music of the universe. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "There is a deep power in which we exist and whose beatitude is accessible to us. Every moment when the individual feels invaded by it is memorable." William Wordsworth, a Unitarian himself, said, "And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of the setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man. A motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of thought, and rolls through all things." Rabindranath Tagore spoke of a stream of life that runs through the world and dances in rhythmic measure, which we can feel too because it is the same stream of life that runs through our veins day and night, Tagore writes. There are times in my life when I feel this rhythmic measure of the stream of life, times when I can feel it in my body the same way you can feel the music in your body when you stand too close to the speakers at a rock concert, or even what you feel when you're sitting in front of the bass drum or too close to the bass drum in an orchestra. I think I tend to feel it more at this time of the year when all of nature seems to be reawakening again. When I am in sync with it, my life feels right. When I am out of sync with it, I feel unsettled. When it has faded to the degree I can no longer feel it, I sometimes feel lost and aimless. I suspect some of you at this point have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about and think I have waded too far into the deep end of the pool of inspiration this morning. But I suspect that at least a few of you do, or at least I hope at least a few of you do. I know there is a hesitancy among us, or at least there is for me, to name this of which I speak. Do we call it God, the divine, the sacred, the holy, the numinous, or something else? Not only do all of these words have baggage, both personal and historical, but at times all language seems inadequate to describe certain kinds of experiences. As the Tao Te Ching says, the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Our silence, our lack of language, may lead some to exclaim, "Hey, look at those Unitarian Universalists. They're dancing without any music." Perhaps. Or perhaps, like the bears, we are dancing in brilliant silence with reverence, awe, and gratitude to the unnamed mystery and miracle of the cosmic symphony in which we live and move and have our being. My friends, no matter what the rest of the world may say, I say, we just keep on dancing. So may it be. Amen.
Our closing hymn today is number 108, "My Life Flows On in Endless Song."
My life flows on in endless song, above earth's lamentations. I hear the real, the far-off hymn that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult Tyrants tremble as they hear the bells of freedom ringing. When friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? To prison cell and dungeon hall, our thoughts to them are winging. When friends by shame are undefiled, how can I keep from singing?
Our chalice lighting this morning advised us to be open to unexpected answers. As we move through the rest of this week, let us also be open to unexpected gifts. This gift of words and music from the UU Fellowship of Raleigh and the Tar Heel Project. The gifts of friends, family, and our UUTC community. And the gifts of nature which surround us always. Our closing words are from Eric Williams. Blessed is the sky and all that is warm and filled with light. Blessed is the air and all that is open and free. Blessed is the earth and all that is steady and firm. Blessed is the sea and all that is hidden and deep. May it be so. Amen. Ho.